thanks. I'm actually going to turn it over to Anna first. She's going to do our intro. So we'll have Anna share her screen and jump in.
Okay, can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah, we're really excited to be here today. How are you all doing? As you already know, we are Auth0 and we love Angular. With us today, we have Sam Julien, who's a developer advocate at Auth0. Sam, do you want to say hi, a little something about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm Sam. I live in Washington State in the U.S. and I've been involved in the Angular community since probably around 2013, 2014. And I'm a Google developer expert and an Angular collaborator. And I've been with Auth0 for a little over 2 years now. So I'm really happy to be here and share with you.
Yeah, thanks. And next up we have Luciano Balmaceda, who's also known as Lucho. So we'll be probably referring to you as Lucho today. Lucho is a senior engineer at our core SDK team. So he's going to be the point of contact. He's going to be able to answer all those difficult questions. Lucho, do you want to say hi?
So hi guys, I'm Lucho. As Anna was saying, I work for the SDKs team in the Auth0 company. I have been working for Auth0 for at least 5 years already, always on the DX SDKs team. So if you have any question about open source or our SDKs, especially Angular, feel free to keep note of those or ask those in the Zoom chat and we will answer those.
Awesome. And I'm Anna Cedri. I'm also a developer advocate at Auth0. So Sam Julien's the America region. I'm the EMEA region, but now everything's online. So I guess we can say we're the global region. I'm not quite sure. I'm also very passionate about the Angular community. I'm the organizer of NG Spain, which this year isn't happening due to, well, obvious reasons. Hopefully next year it'll be up and running again. So I'm really looking forward to organizing that. Before we dive in, there will be a feedback form which we'll hand out at the end, so stick around please. If you fill out the feedback form, you can choose whether you want an Auth0 t-shirt or an Auth0 mug. You will get one of these if you fill out the form. It's not a raffle. And we have some questions for you, which, Sam, I don't know if you want to pull these up in the poll.
Yeah, Brooke, do we have the ability to run a poll?
Yeah, do you want me to?
Yeah, maybe you could just do a quick poll with these 3 questions. It doesn't look like I have the power to do it.
Let me get those in.
Just want to get a feel for what people's level of experience is to help us kind of tailor.
Well, if you like, Sam, maybe you can send these questions to Brooke and I continue on this end.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I'll just I'll shoot them over to Brooke.
That way we don't waste any time. So we have 1 hour. I just want to show you today's agenda. I'm going to be giving a 5 to 10 minute intro to authentication. Then Sam Julien is going to take over and he's going to be the one that's doing the hands-on workshop. And last but not least, we have the Q&A that Brooke was talking about, and Lucha will be the person that will be able to answer your questions. So let's dive in, and I'm going to be starting with what is authentication? So authentication, as you may or may not know, is the process of confirming an identity. What do I mean by this? So it's when a user or an application proves they are who they say they are by providing valid credentials. Now, these credentials tend to be a username and password, for example, and they're sometimes combined with other factors, which tend to fall into 3 categories of what you know, what you have, or what you are. So just to go over that, it's basically when you as a user or an application proves they are who they say they are by providing valid credentials, tend to be username and password. And I just want to clarify what authorization is, because sometimes I hear authentication and authorization used interchangeably, and this isn't quite right. Because authorization is the process of verifying what a user has access to. So it's once a user or an application is granted access to an API, After that, the API determines the extent of the permissions that it should assign. So it tends to occur after authentication. I can't speak anymore. I'm very sorry. So once we have validated those credentials through authentication, the API then has some idea of what sort of access it should grant, and that is authorization. Just to note that access to a resource is protected by both of these, authentication and authorization. So let's go into our intro to authentication for web apps. And we're going to start with server-side web apps, and then we will dig into single-page web apps. And why do I want to start with server-side web apps, even though this is an Angular workshop? Because we've all heard about cookies, right? So when I say server-side web apps, I mean apps you might build with Node, with Ruby, with .NET, and it's cookie-based authentication. It's implemented by each web platform differently though, but at the end of the day, they all end up setting some sort of cookie, and that's then tied to a session on the server, which represents the authenticated user. To get a better understanding of this, let's take a look at what the flow might look like. So you have your browser, and on the server, you have your backend web app that might have a database. And then a user submits their credentials to log in, and if it's successful, then the server is going to set a cookie in the browser which represents the user's session. Therefore, the user is authenticated and our web app knows it, and also the browser knows it because it has a cookie. Right, and then on following requests, or if there's traffic to the site, the cookie then is attached by the browser and sent to the server. And then this, the requested page HTML and any sensitive data will be sent to the browser and the user can view it. So if the cookie expires, or if there isn't a cookie and a request is made for this protected data, then the user will have to log in again and will receive a new cookie to use onwards. And once that's done successfully, then the application can send them secure data once again. So this is quite a flow, but let's take a look at single page apps because we see a lot of token-based authentication instead. So let's see how that may work. We have our browser again, and when the user navigates to our application, the app is compiled, downloaded, and runs in the browser itself. We usually get data. There's your poll, everyone. We usually get data from an API, maybe not our own API, and we will get tokens from an authorization server. So an authorization server is basically a set of endpoints whose purpose is to issue tokens. Next, the user is going to submit their credentials to log in. And then if it's successful in this case, then the authorization server issues a token back. And when the token will then be sent out to our API with any requests for data. The API is then going to verify the token with middleware, and everything works. The data is returned as a JSON, which the app then consumes. So even though this seems like a complicated process, and it is, we are all here, I assume we're all here application builders, and we don't want to become identity experts because we have a lot on our plate. And that's where the Auth0 Angular SDK comes to the rescue, right? We don't have to deal too much with identity knowledge, whereas Auth0 Angular SDK takes care of most of this for you. But just to prove this to you, I am going to now pass the stage on to Sam Julien, who's actually going to do the workshop. Is the poll finished? Can I share the answers?
We can definitely, do you want me to end it right now?
Sure.
Okay, let's end it and then I can display.
Cool.
Okay.
Okay, that's really interesting. And it's good to see that none of you have used Auth0 before because this is going to be nice and fresh and new for you all. Okay, Sam, I'm going to leave the stage all for you.
Okay. All right. Let me share my screen. All right. So let me show. Let me give you a quick overview of what we're going to be doing. So Anna has added all of the steps to the slides, and so if we have a couple. Basically, we have a couple things in place in case you fall behind or get stuck on something. We have the slides here. I think we sent out a link to those. If not, we can drop them in the chat. And then what we're going to do is we're going to work through this sample application, and we're going to take it step by step. We've got a repo that you can clone and install if you haven't already. We're going to add the new Auth0 Angular SDK, which has just come out. What was it, like a few weeks ago or something? And we're going to step through all of the basics of using the new Angular SDK. So we're going to configure it. We're going to have you able to, we're going to create a login button, a logout button. You're going to be able to display profile information from a user. And then we've also got a tiny little Express API that's a part of the repo. And we're going to be able to protect the routes with an auth guard, and then set up the little API to where we can call both a public endpoint and a protected endpoint with what's called an HTTP interceptor. So what's cool is that the Angular SDK, basically what we're going to do is we're going to configure it in Auth0 and do some configuration in our app. But you're going to see that there's not much else that we need to do. It's going to be, you're not going to have to worry about processing the token or dealing with any of the behind the scenes flow of logging into the application or checking to see that there's an active session, things like that. So let's dive in. The repo for this, I think we can also throw a link in there, but you can fork it or you can clone it. But the way that we set it up to make it easy on you in case you're a little behind. I know for me, when I do workshops, I always fall behind inevitably. And so then I get frustrated. And so what we've done is we've included a bunch of instructions to supplement the slides in case you fall behind or you miss something that we've said. And then the other thing that we've done is we've made a branch for each step. And this is really helpful because what you can do is you can click on one of these branches and you can actually just see the difference between the current branch and the previous branch. So I could go over here and compare step 3 to step 4, and I can see exactly what we're going to do between those steps. So this is a great way for you to be able to go back and catch up. The other thing you can do here is you can just check out whatever branch. Like if you fall behind at all in this session, you can just check out the branch that you need to be in and just start from there. So the goal here is that even if you can't get through this material just in this next half hour or so, that you won't be left hanging and you can follow it on your own. And if you do, let us know how it goes. We're going to have that survey at the end, but this is like the first iteration of this workshop since this SDK is so new. So we definitely love feedback, any trouble that you run into. Okay, so without further ado, I'll go ahead and jump in, and Lucio and Anna will be in the chat fielding questions, things like that. But once you've cloned the repo, I'm going to hop over to Visual Studio Code here. Actually, let me quit this other one so I don't get confused. Okay, so and is this color scheme going to be okay? I can switch it to a light theme if somebody if we need to for accessibility reasons. Don't be shy if you need me to switch to a light colored theme. Let me get rid of this. Let me hide this little window. It sure takes up a lot of screen real estate.
Looks like the color is good.
Okay, great. Okay, so once you clone the repo, the first thing that you'll want to do is run npm install to go ahead and install all the dependencies. The way this is set up, we have an Angular CLI project in the source folder. And then I have just a really tiny little Express server. It literally has 2 endpoints. It's not a big thing, but it's part of it. So what I have in the package JSON, I have the dependencies for Angular, and then I also have the dependencies for the little Express server. So when you run npm install, it'll just install all of that. And then the one thing you need to do to get this running before you run npm start is you need to, this .m file is what the server will use for configuration. And so all you need to do is make a copy of this. Let's see here. With my resolution being so high, I can't get to an empty spot. Here we go. So just make a copy of that. And then just take the copy.example off. You could also just rename the file if you want, but you might find it helpful to have a reference point. You don't need to worry about these values yet. We're going to get there, but you just need to have this file in place. And so once you do that, you can just run npm start. And what will happen, hold on. Oh, I already have this in use somewhere. Oh yeah, I was doing this before. So let me close this other, clear this out. Okay, so if you run npm start, what will happen is it's gonna simultaneously run the little Express server as well as the Angular CLI. You don't really need to worry about the server yet. We'll get to that in a little bit. So once that is up and running, you should be able to go to your browser and go to localhost 4200. And you just see this little sample application. It's got some links and things like that. And this application was created by our teammate Dan, and it's solely for the purpose of helping you set up the Auth0 Angular SDK. We'll have a route here for displaying the profile information. We've got a route here for calling that protected API that we'll get to in a little bit. And so that is getting it up and running. So now what we need to do is we need to configure, we're gonna install the Auth0 SDK, and we're gonna configure the application in Auth0. So to install the SDK, you can either, you can stop the server if you want. You may need to restart it anyway once you install a new dependency. But you can actually just use ng-add. The SDK team has made this compatible with Angular CLI, so you can do ng-add and then auth0/auth0-angular. And that will install the new SDK. Great. And so now what we need to do is we need to tell Auth0 about this application. So Auth0 is a service basically that's going to handle creating tokens to log your users in and keep track of them in a user store. So if you haven't already, you'll need to sign up for a free account. The free account's very generous. You won't run out of free activity. It never expires or anything. It's only limited by features and by the number of active users. But I don't think in this workshop you'll have any trouble with 7,000 active users. So once you sign up, I'm going to go ahead and log in with my one of my other ones. So let me go back. So we have our application, but what we need is we need to tell Auth0 that we're going to need it to create tokens for this application. So what we're going to do, when you first log into Auth0, it's going to take you to this dashboard, and you're going to click over on this applications section over here. And then, and there's a chance if you're signing up brand new that your UI is going to look like slightly different, because I know they're rolling out some new design for this, and my account is pretty old at this point, but it's going to look pretty much the same, just maybe a little bit different. And so next thing we're going to want to do is click Create Application. And here is just where we're going to tell Auth0 about our new application that we're going to need. So we're going to give it a name. We can just call it Angular SDK Workshop, whatever you want to call it. And we're going to tell it that it's a single page web application. So you might know that there are different types of applications. You've got native apps on your phone, regular web apps that use a server, machine-to-machine applications like CLIs, and then applications that use things like Angular, React, or Vue are called single-page web applications, and they use a specific flow for identity and access management, and that's what we're going to be using here. So so you can just click Create. And by the way, these instructions, these are in the README of the repo. So if you're not able to, if I'm going too fast or anything, you can find these in the README. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over to this Settings tab, and we're sort of creating a communication bridge between Auth0 and the Angular application. So what we need to do is basically tell Auth0 where we're expecting these login and logout calls to come from. So there are 3 places that we need to add the URLs for our application. So the first one is in the allowed callback URLs. This is just meaning where we're going to redirect the user back to the application when we log in. So we're just going to add our localhost 4200 here. And then we're going to do the same thing in 2 other places. The next place is in allowed logout URLs. So when the user clicks logout, we're going to return them back to the page once they've been logged out. And so we're going to tell Auth0 that localhost 4200 is where we're going to do that. And then the last one is for allowed web origins. So this is the Angular application is going to make requests under the hood to an Auth0 URL to handle auth requests, to handle authentication requests. So you need to add this application origin URL for to avoid any sort of cross-origin resource area. If you've ever seen a CORS error, this is going to be part of that. And this is used for the silent authentication. Like when you reload the application, Auth0 is going to be able to just log you back into the application. And that is actually the only stuff that we need to do. Everything else we can just leave as defaults and hit save. Now don't close that yet because you're going to need a little bit of this information on the page. So we're just going to go back over to the code now. And if I pull up, I can probably restart the server at this point and just leave it on in the background for a while. This Zoom bar is taking up a lot of real estate. Let's see. Here we go. All right, we'll close that. Close all this. And if I pull up our README. Okay, so next thing we need to do is actually configure the SDK in the application. So the way we do this, we have this auth0.config.json file that we are able to add our options to. So what you're going to do is similar to the the end file, which was used for the server, you're going to use this file for the client. So what we can do is you could either copy and paste it, or you could rename it and just take off the .example. It's up to you, depending on if you want a reference point. I'm just going to go ahead and remove that. So then we need two things for now. We just need the domain and the client ID. So we can go back over to our application in Auth0, and we can copy the client ID. This is just a unique identifier for our application. It just tells Auth0, hey, this is the application that I want to request login for. So we'll copy the client ID, paste that in here, and we'll do the same thing for the domain. The domain is your unique domain for when you signed up for Auth0. So I'll go ahead and paste that in there. Cool. Okay. Let's just check in. Is everybody following this? Does any issues coming up? Anything in the chat?
Looks good for now.
Everybody okay?
Everyone's saying all good, up to speed. If anyone isn't, they can always send me a direct message or something, and I can help them figure it out. I think that's possible, right? Or is it?
I think so, yeah. Okay, great. So now we're ready to configure the SDK in the actual application. And there's two spots that we need to do that. The first place that we need to configure is the environment file of the Angular application. We need to actually be able to tell Angular about these values and use them in the application. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over in our source folder. There is this environment.ts file. And we're going to add a few different things here. You can actually, this is all just the boilerplate that the CLI provides. If you want to delete these comments, you can. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to import our domain and our client ID from that JSON file. So we can say import and domain client ID from .. and then authconfig.json. And then we can actually use that, use those values. So we're going to add a new object to our environment config here called auth. So just create a new object there. And we're going to use destructuring basically. So we're going to give it a key of domain and use our domain as the value. We're going to do the same thing with client ID. And then we also need to specify a redirect URI for the application. So this is when we log into the application, we need to tell it where to send the user by default. So we're going to create a new property called redirect URI. And for this, we're just going to use window.location.origin. That'll just tell Auth0 to send the user back to wherever the current address is on the page. Cool. So that is the environment config, and this is where we're at right now. Is the step 2 branch of the repo. So the code that I'm writing is all in the step 2 branch. Cool. And so then the other thing we need to do is we need to import the module for the SDK into our application. So the Angular SDK from Auth0 includes a bunch of different stuff for you. It includes an auth service. It includes a route guard. It includes an interceptor. And so these are things that you would normally have to write yourself. Before we had this SDK, you would create your own service class, and you would write all these methods yourself about logging in and logging out and handling the token. And what's awesome is that the new SDK actually just does all of this for you. So all we need to do is we need to import the auth module from @auth0/auth0-angular. I don't know why it can't find it. Did I install it? Did I actually run ng-add? I swear I did. Maybe my IntelliSense is just a little behind the times. Oh, maybe I never actually ran that. I never actually ran it. Let me run ng-add Angular Auth0 Angular. I swear I ran it. 404 not found.
Will be at Auth0 /
Oh, yeah, duh, thanks.
While it's installing, there is a question from Oscar that says we should cut out the use of resolve JSON module in the tsconfig.base.
Oh, yeah, I meant to do that. Yeah. So in this, in our sample application, we added a config to our tsconfig that allows us to resolve JSON modules. Thanks. I meant to say that. So the reason we're able to import from this JSON file is due to this setting in TypeScript for being able to resolve JSON modules. So if you didn't want to do that or couldn't do that for some reason, you could just add those variables directly into environment.ts if you wanted to. But yeah, that's a great point. Okay, so now I have that installed. So I'm just going to import the auth module. I'm also going to import our environment configuration. So I'm going to just import environment. I'm going to import it as env just because environment is sort of a reserved word. It gets confusing. And so just from /environments/environment. And now to actually use the auth module, we're going to go into our imports. And underneath, well, it doesn't really matter where we do it, but I'm going to do it underneath the font awesome module. I'm going to import auth module. And then this, similar to other libraries, we're going to have a for root function that we need to call. So this is similar to like ngrx, where you'd have a for root function where you pass in some configuration. So this method is going to take a configuration object, and all we need to do is spread out our auth environment variables. So I'm just going to do the spread operator. What's happening? Spread operator, and then env.auth. And so now we have the all of the Auth SDK available to us, basically. I'll go ahead and run the application again. And theoretically, nothing really changes here because we're not actually doing anything yet. So go ahead and just close that and just check in the browser, just make sure everything is still running. And yeah, everything's still running. So now we can actually get to the fun stuff. We will go ahead and add a login button. So I'm going to go to, this is going to be step 3 of the branches, is where you can find the solution for this. So let's go ahead and we're actually going to create a login component, and we've got the CLI command in here. So I'm going to create a login component. Now I've actually set up our Angular JSON here to skip the tests and just do inline styles. So all we need to do is just run this ng-generate component, and then you can do component/login-button. And that'll go ahead and create the component, and it'll also update the app module for us. So you can see if I go to the app module, close this, you can see now we've got this login button component that's been added here. And then in our components, we now have a login button component. So let's go ahead and write our actual logic here for the component, first thing we're going to do is we're going to import our auth service. So I'm going to say public, let's call it auth service. And it's not going to know where this is coming from automatically, probably. So we're going to import it from our Angular SDK. So I'm going to say import auth service from, man, that muscle memory of @Angular is very strong. So I've got importing the auth service here. And the only thing we need to do in here is we need to add our function for logging in. So we're going to create a function called login with redirect. And that's just going to return void here. It's not actually going to return anything. And so we're just going to call our auth service. The auth service already has a login with redirect function. So all we're really doing is creating a little pass-through for this. So we're going to say this.auth, and we can say, you can see we've got some TypeScript hints here, and we're going to say login with redirect, and that's it. So this is going to be the function that we're going to attach to our login button. So let's go ahead and create our login button. Man, it's already 9:43. That's crazy. Go ahead and you can get rid of this boilerplate here. And let's just do a button with classes of, let's start with button. We're using Bootstrap in here, so we can add in a bunch of classes, button primary. You can style this however you want. You can copy paste if you feel like it. We'll just say login. And then we just need to add a click handler to this. So we'll do the click event, and we'll call our login with redirect function here. So let's, let me hide that. So we got our button with login with redirect. And then the last thing we need to do is we need to add this login button to our navigation. So if I go over to the app, we don't actually have the button showing up anywhere. So we just need to add it up in this corner here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over to our navbar component. We'll just go over to the HTML for the navbar. And underneath our main app nav, we can add our app login button. And hit save there. So we have the button showing. The only thing though is if we try to log in, you can log in. The first time you're going to have to either sign up or authorize the application. So you'll have to sign up with, I'd suggest using just a simple username and password for now, just to get through the workshop. You can also set it up to use social logins like Google or Facebook or Twitch or literally anything you can think of. For now, you just might want to make it easier on yourself and do a quick login and password. So I've logged in, but the button is still showing. And I can prove that I've logged in if I go over to our cookies and inspect. You can see a whole bunch of stuff here that's from Auth0. Try to expand that out. So I've got that. I think there might be a little, just have like an ID in local storage. But you can see that we've got an is authenticated cookie here, and that's set to true. So we know that I'm logged in, but the login button is still showing. And so what we can do is actually hide the login button if we're already authenticated. So let's add that really quick. So what we need to do is in our navbar component, the TypeScript, we need to import our auth service again, because we're going to use another thing on our auth service. So I'm just going to say public auth service. I don't know why I'm not getting IntelliSense for that. That seems weird. And then I'll import the auth service from @auth0. And so basically, this is just going to make the auth service available to us on the navbar component. So back in the actual HTML, I can add an ngIf. So what we can do is do star ngIf, and you're going to want a parenthesis first. So what we're going to say is we're going to say auth is authenticated. This is an observable that the auth service provides that it exposes to you that will emit true or false whether you're logged in. So what we can do is use the async pipe to subscribe to this and get that value and use that as in a Boolean. So I can say if that observable is emitting false, then display this login button. Otherwise, don't display this login button. And in a second, we'll do the inverse of the logout. So I'm going to go back over here, and now you can see that the button has disappeared. Of course, now we have no way of logging out of the application. So let's go ahead and add the logout button. So we're going to move on to the next step here. So we'll go over, this will be the logout. So we're going to do something really similar. Basically, going to do the same thing that we did before. We go over to create the logout button. So we'll open up my terminal and do ng generate component and then component/logout button. And here, can add the, let's open up the logout button TypeScript file. Let me go over to, okay. So similar process, we're going to add the auth service. So public auth service. And we're going to import auth service from Auth0/Angular. We're also going to, we need a reference to our document, and I'll show you this in just a second. First, let's create the logout method, which will return void. And we're just going to call this .auth.logout. Now we need to pass a destination to return to. So we need an options object here, and we need a property called return to. But where are we going to return to? For that, we're gonna use the actual document, which Angular actually has a token for this, an injection token that we can use. So we're gonna use @inject, which we need to import from Angular. And we're going to use the document token. And we'll create this as a private variable called doc, which is of the type document. Now, if you don't want to use this, you can use something like window.location.origin. This is just sort of like a really kind of like bulletproof way of knowing that you're always going to get the correct location origin for this. All right, so why is it yelling at me? Import document, can't find document. Import, it didn't give me my IntelliSense. Here we go. So we need to import document from Angular Common for that. Okay, so we've got our logout function here. Let's just create our button really quick. So we'll go over to logout button component. And you know what? Let's just, for the sake of time, let's copy over what we had in our login button, just because it's going to be almost the same. So we'll go over to our logout button, paste that in, change this to logout, and change this click method to logout. Cool. And then we want to do kind of the opposite of what we did with the navbar. Instead of having the logout button show when you're authenticated, we want the opposite. So what we can do is we can just duplicate this and change login to logout, and then change this to true. Or actually, we don't even need that. We can just take that away. So now we're only going to show the logout button if we are authenticated. Okay, I know I'm moving a little quickly. We spent a lot of time in the beginning chit-chatting, so but we do have all of the sample code here for you. You should be able to just step through each of those things. So if I go back over to the application now, you can see I've got my logout button, and if I click logout, I get sent back to the application, and now I have the login button again. So I'll log in again. I've got to log in. And now we've got the logout. There's one little issue that we have here. If you hit refresh on the page, notice that there's a little bit of a UI flash there where it's logged in. Well, it doesn't really know whether it's logged in or logged out, so it doesn't show either of the buttons. We can actually fix that by adding another check for whether we're authenticated. So I'm going to go over to our code. And this is, there's a second commit in step 4 called fix UI flashing, and that's where you can find this code. So in our, what we need to do is we need to check in the actual app component whether we're still loading the authentication. So what we can do is we can import the auth service into the app component. So I'm going to create a constructor and do private auth service. And that's all we need. I don't know. I still don't understand why we're not getting IntelliSense for that. Auth service from.
You might want to restart the TS server.
Yeah, that might be the trick. Can I? There we go. Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so we've imported that, and now we can go to our app component HTML. And all we're going to do is check to see if we're loading the authentication. And if so, we will display a little loading component that we've already provided for you. And otherwise, we'll display the rest of the application. So above our app nav bar, we're going to create a class, and it's going to have a class of container. I'm just using Emmet here because it's a nice way of being able to create HTML. It's built into Visual Studio Code. And inside of this div, we're going to use our app loading component. Again, this is already provided in the app. You don't have to do it yourself. And so we're going to do an ng-if here. And there's another observable that the SDK provides that's called isLoading. So I can do auth.isLoading, and we'll also need the async pipe for that. So we're going to display this if that's true. Otherwise, we can use ng-if else, say else, and create a variable called loaded. And now we can use ng-template to display the rest of our app. So basically, we're going to wrap the rest of the application in an ng-template. So I'm going to say ng-template, and then I'll move this to the bottom. And we're going to use our template variable called loaded. I don't understand. Oh, I made this private by accident. This is supposed to be public for our template variable. So just to review here, what we've done is we've created a little loading component, and we're checking to see if our authentication service is still loading up all our auth stuff, basically knows whether we're logged in. Otherwise, we're going to set this template variable called loaded up, and it'll have a value of true. And so when that's true, we're going to tell Angular to display this template, which is going to have the rest of our application in it. So what this means is if I go back to the application and just refresh the page, we get this nice little loading page, and we don't get that UI flash. As soon as the page loads, we have our login button here. So we are getting close to time. I want to know. I have time to keep going. But I want to be respectful of people's time. So if you want to stop here, since we've added login and log out, I can answer some questions, or we can just keep going. We probably have another maybe 20 minutes or so, but I'm more than happy to keep going. We can keep going. So we got one vote from Johan that says keep going. So I'm just going to keep going. Let's see. Oh, I closed the chat. We got a few people saying keep going. Okay. All right. Awesome. All right. So I'm going. Let's close that again. All right. So now we've got our app loading. So now we're going to move. This is going to be, let me go back on my reference. We are now at here, step 5, displaying the profile information. So what we're going to do, the Angular SDK basically provides the user for you. So what we can do is we've already got the basics of a profile component in the sample application, just so you didn't have to start it from scratch. But there's some things we can do to complete it, basically. So I'm going to let's just close all this for now. And I'm going to open up profile component.ts. Right now, it's just sort of an empty thing here. So we're going to do a couple things. First, we're going to import our auth service again. So public auth service. And now we have our autocomplete. Thanks, Lucho. And in our ng-on-init, we're going to call another, or we're going to subscribe to another observable that the auth service gives us, which is the user. So we have this.auth, and we actually just have user $sign to signify that it's an observable. So we can actually just subscribe to the user, and Auth0 behind the scenes will handle everything that we need. Man, it's really annoying that Zoom uses escape to show the meeting controls. In our subscribe here for our callback function, we're actually just going to get the profile. And we need to set a variable on our class. So we're gonna above our constructor, we'll add a public member. We'll just call this profile JSON. It's going to be a string, and it's going to default to null. So when we subscribe to this observable, we're going to stringify. We're going to say this dot profile JSON is equal to this profile that comes back will just actually be JSON. So we can use JSON.stringify, pass in the profile, and then null and 2, which is the init value, right? And the spacing, something like that. I always forget what those last couple parameters are. Lucho probably remembers. Okay, and I don't need that semicolon. So now we're just automatically subscribing to the user. This is actually behind the scenes. This is the ID token that brings back the profile. But with the Angular SDK, you don't actually really need to worry about that. It just sort of handles it for you. So now let's go over to our profile component and just actually display that user profile. So I'm going to do a series of divs. Let's do div, and then an image tag. That'll get me started. And let's see, we're gonna have a couple of rows here. Let's just start from the top. So underneath this, we're just going to say ng-if, and we're going to use our async pipe for the user. So we'll say auth.user and async pipe. And we're going to give that a variable name as user. So we're just going to wait until that is available to us. And then let's give this a little bit of styling. We're going to give it a row. We're going to say align items center. And then we actually have some built-in classes that Dan made. So we're going to give this the profile header class. And then inside of here, let's give this some styling as well. We're going to give it a column medium of 2 and a margin bottom of 3. And then for our image, our profile image, we're going to make this an input because we're actually going to get this from our user. So I can say user.picture and give it an alt text for accessibility, user's profile picture. We can also give this a little bit of styling. So I'm going to give this some classes and say rounded circle, image fluid. These are all Bootstrap, if I am not mistaken. And then profile picture, I think, is a class that Dan made. Okay, so we've got that section. We've got our picture. Let's just pull it up in the browser to see if we've got anything showing. If I click on profile, yes. So we've got something there. Let's display the rest of the profile information. So we'll make another div. And this div will have a class of column medium, text center, text center, and then text medium left. And we'll do an h2 tag. And here we'll do the user's name. So user.name. And then let's also display their email address. So I'll say user.email. Let's see what we've got. So now we've got that going. And this is because I'm logged in. Cool. And then lastly, we can just, if we want to just display the profile JSON underneath the rest of this, just so you can see everything that's in that. Let's give this a class of row. And let's also do an ng-if for profile JSON, just to make sure we have that so it's not null. So we'll do a pre-tag. And we can just pass profile JSON in there. And let's give it a little bit of styling. We'll do a class, and we'll say column 12, text light, BG dark background, and then a padding of 4. And again, all of this is in the diffs, so you should be able to just copy paste if you want. And there you go. We've got all of our profile information. This is just coming straight from Auth0. If I were to pull up my profile in Auth0, you would see these similar fields. This up here, you won't see this. This is for another demo that I was doing for a different thing, so you won't see something like that. But you will see, you may not have an avatar. I don't have one, so it just gives me this like default one. So that is how we show our profile. So the big takeaways here are just the user observable is another observable that the SDK exposes to you. Okay, so now we've got those things going. Now it would be nice, though, if I were to log out of the app here, I can click on the profile. Nothing shows up, but it's one of those things where there's no reason for an anonymous person to be able to get to this page, right? So what we're going to do is we're actually going to prevent people from accessing the profile page or this external API page unless they're logged in. And this is another area where the SDK just sort of provides everything for you. You don't actually have to write these guards or anything. So let's go ahead and just add a guard. In Angular, we call it a can activate guard to prevent this. So I'm going to go over to our app routing module. This is over down here towards the root of the app folder here. You have app routing module. I just always do Command P and just start typing the file. So I hate browsing with the mouse. So that's why you keep seeing me doing that. So inside of our app routing module, we just need to import our guard that the Angular SDK, the Auth0 SDK provides us. So what we can do is say import, it's called auth guard from auth0 / auth0 Angular. Fun fact, I wrote this guard. It was my contribution to the SDK. So if there's a problem with it, I guess you can blame me. So for both the profile component and the external API component, if you want to use multiple cursors, you can just command click onto both of those lines. And we're going to add can activate. Can activate basically tells Angular whether or not a route can be navigated to or activated. And it takes an array of route guards. So for both of these, we're going to add the auth guard from the Angular SDK. And like magic, if I go back over to the application, you can see that it's already sent me over to the login. And that's because I was already on that page. So if I go back to our sample here, let's actually go back to localhost 4200. So I'm logged out. And if I try to click on profile, it's just going to send me to the login form. Now, there are other ways you can configure this if you want to, but for now, let's leave it as the default. And we can click login. And now I'm able to see the profile page. I can navigate. I can also navigate to the external API page. If I were to log out and try to go to the external API page, it would do the same thing and redirect me over to the login. And just like that, like you didn't have to write your own route guard. This blows my mind. We've come a long way. So that is step 6 in the branches. There's a step 6 for the route guard. And now we're going to move to step 7 of configuring the API. So what we want is we want to be able to call this get public message and get private or protected message. So to do that, we just need to do a couple of things. And let's see here. Let's go to the slides. So we already have the API actually provided for you, but we need to do a similar process to what we did with the Angular application, where we actually tell Auth0 about the API and then configure everything. So if I go over to the code and I can show you the little server is just in this API server file, and it's going to pull in some of our auth configuration. And then it just has a public endpoint, and then this private endpoint is going to look for the token that we're going to send from the client. And it's going to check to see if we have a token. If not, it's going to prevent us from accessing this endpoint. So that's what we need to do. So we need to set up an API in Auth0 and configure it. So we're going to go back over to Auth0. It looks like there's some questions. Is there anything, Lucia and Anna, that we need to address before we move on?
I'm wondering if we should answer, because someone asked if we can do the Q&A first and then finish.
Yeah, we can do that. Since we're running over, we could, this is probably like a good stopping point. We could do the Q&A and then if people want to stay on and finish, we can.
Yeah, that might be the best way to go with it.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing my screen then, so we can all answer the question. All right, let's see. Let's work our way through. We still have.
Do you want me to read the questions?
Yeah, sure. Well, you could
Okay.
pick some of the questions and go through them.
So one of the questions that Oscar had was how to set the environments in the Cyril, I think. Okay, I knew I checked that question. Yeah, there was a question about the production environments. What's the best way to set the environment variables in a production environment when you are using an Angular application? You mentioned that we were using the JSON file in this case, but you can also use the environment files as the Angular documentation describes. I think I answered a question that is similar to that. So you.
Oh yeah.
You might want to check if that's enough.
Yeah, you don't have to do the JSON file. You can create you can just put the config values directly into the environment file in Angular, and then put different ones in for different environments. So you could have environment.staging.ts, for example, and put in the configuration. Generally, you'll have like an Auth0 tenant for each environment, and so you'll have different like client ID for each environment.
Yeah, and also note that the domain and client ID are public values, so there is no need to hide them. You know, in the end, regular web apps, single-page applications the code is there and it can be seen. If you make a request to Auth0, you will see that the client ID and domain will be sent in that request. So there is no need to hide there is no sensitive information to hide in those values. I understand that when you are doing production builds and development builds, you are going to probably use different values for testing purposes, but there is no need to hide. Hopefully that answers your question, Oscar.
That also answers Sundakar's question as well about production credentials. So I'll go ahead and mark that. Cyril had asked about deployed to web and native. Do you want to answer that, Lucho?
So I think the question came up when you were showing how to set up a new Auth0 application and get the client ID and domain, and you showed how to set up a single page application. I guess his question is, how will you go if you want to also have a mobile application in this case? In the cases of Auth0, you probably need to have two separate applications, one for the mobile application and one for the single page application, each of them configured with the right application type in the Auth0 dashboard. That will also help you to configure the things correctly and don't use the wrong authentication flows. So it's going to enforce you in a way to do like the best practice for that scenario. Yeah, and internally, if in the end what you need is sharing the user database, you can do that using the same connection. For example, connections are shared across applications, so that's another way to do that. Another question from Cyril is that previously the Angular SDK didn't have much maintenance. Yes, that's true. For this one, he's concerned about the use of the whether we will maintain this and keep it maintained for RxJS releases of the new versions of Angular. I don't know if we are going to test this for RC. The idea when everything came up, the idea was to make an SDK that was using or targeting the Angular version that most of the people is using today in the community. We target one of the latest ones, and the idea is to, of course, keep it up to date as much as possible. We have a product team that is always keeping an eye on new releases in everything related to technology, and also the team is also aware. So we will be paying attention to those kind of releases, and ideally we'll be maintaining those. That's the goal. Yes.
Yeah, the new Angular, this Angular SDK is like part of the core of the SDKs, along with the React SDK and some others. So I think the target is to maintain for all major releases. Cool. So David asked about having a custom interface for login. Yes, this is actually, I'll share my screen again. This is actually done through the Auth0.
I can, okay. I had it up and ready.
Oh, you already had it ready?
Yeah, don't worry.
Oh, okay. So if you click on this universal login section over here, you can actually customize your login to be whatever you want. You can add a company logo. You can change the colors. We also have a new, more lightweight login page you can experiment with. You can learn about the details. It's fine if you use the default classic one. You can also use the new one. And there's some differences between the two. But for customizing, you just add things here and hit save, and then it'll just automatically show up. So like if I change this to, let me get, let's change this to purple and hit save and then log out. You can see that now my login button is purple. And if I wanted to change the logo, I could. So that's how you customize the login screen.
There's a question from Frederick asking if this is open source. Yes, the repo is there. It's Auth0 Angular. Auth0 Angular, right? Or Angular 0? I'm lost.
Auth0 Angular.
Auth0 Angular,
yeah. So, yep, feel free to go and check for issues or open new pull requests.
Dan had said, looks like your login token is persisting across page refreshes, and yours is not. Dan, did you use login? Did you use login and password, or did you use like a social? Oh, he's using Google. So there's a thing with Google Authentication. I don't know if one of you have the doc handy, but for Google Authentication, you need to create some credentials. What's it called? A key. Like, so we provide dev keys for Google single sign-on, Google Authentication, and that works for logging in and logging out. But to actually use the silent authentication, the refresh, you need to actually create your own set of keys. There's some instructions, if I can find them. It should be under, if we go to connections, social, let me find it. Yes, so let me share my screen again so I can just show this really quick. So if you go over here to connections and then social, and then click, you see how it has this little warning sign. If I click on that, you see this warning here that says that it's using Auth0 development keys. That's why it's not able to do the refresh. So what you need to do is, if you click on this link, it'll walk you through how you can create your own keys and things like that. that's why I kind of briefly mentioned you might just want to do like a quick login and password and set this up. But that's what's going on there. Let's mark that as done. Let's see. Can browser extensions somehow block the Auth0 JS module? I've never experienced that. I suppose it'd be possible if you had something like Privacy Badger or something, or a script blocking, but I've never had that problem with Auth0. But I'd definitely be curious to know if that's possible. And it looks like you had a thing with it refusing to load the image. I don't know what that's from. That seems like something with your environment, maybe, because I don't have any sort of like, there's nothing special about that favicon or anything like that. So there might be I don't know what Kaspersky Labs is. That might be something related. Looks like that might be like a cybersecurity thing or something, like a browser thing. How would you link this up to a .NET backend with identity, for example? You would. Oh, go ahead, Anna. No.
I was going to post the blog post here that we have on Angular and .NET.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, great. You can toss that into the chat.
We also have a .NET SDK, so
yes.
I'm going to throw that in there for you too.
Adi, our good friend, says role-based access to pages. So that's definitely beyond the scope of this little workshop, but we do have a number of resources on role-based access control. Let me toss in like sort of the starting point for in the docs on that. Essentially, you set up all the roles and permissions in Auth0 and add them to the token, and then you can pull those off of the token in the app and check to see. And generally what you'll do is you'll have like each role be a collection of permissions, and that way you can get really granular on what you want each role to do, and then you can check that in either the front end or the back end. Yeah, we can do a follow-up. We should probably do a follow-up workshop someday on roles and permissions and stuff like that.
Definitely, yeah.
Karuna asks about detecting anomalies. So this is actually another feature that we have. I believe it's part of which plan is that part of? This is a paid feature. I think anomaly protection actually doesn't come into play until like more of an enterprise. I'll post the just like the doc on that. We do have a very sophisticated anomaly detection feature. Detects breach passwords, also detects like brute force attacks, things like that. And those are paid features.
We also have Auth0 signals. The IP risk.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if...
I'm actually not sure if we're still doing that. Cool. And then just Oscar had a couple more things about .env and production. The rest of that is going to depend on your CI/CD, your continuous deployment and continuous integration. There's nothing special necessarily about Auth0's configuration. So whatever situation you're setting up with Angular and your environment variables in your build process, you should be able to inject into your front end. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's nothing really specific from the Auth0 standpoint about doing that. Yeah, sorry, can't be more helpful. It's just sort of like there's a lot of variables there on like the rest of your staging environment and your build environment and all that stuff. Okay, so we're at 10:30. Obviously, if you need to take off, you can. If you'd like, we can continue and finish up because you're going to have access to this recording. We may as well just keep going.
Yeah, I'm just going to post the feedback form for those who want to fill that in and get a t-shirt or a mug.
Yeah, good call.
So I posted it there in the chat.
Awesome. Cool. So I'm going to go ahead and just share my screen. We only have kind of a few more minutes left of what we're doing here. We're just going to configure our API and be able to call these two endpoints. So I'm going to go, this is going to be steps 7 and 8, basically. So if you want to follow along for setting up the API, this is what we're going to be doing. So I'm going to go over to Auth0 again. Let me close these out. And this time we're going to go to APIs, and we're going to click Create API. And we're going to give this a name. You can call this whatever you want. I'm going to call it Angular SDK API. And then you need to give this an identifier. And this, the first time you see this, it's a little weird because it's formatted like a URL, but it's not actually a real URL. So what you can do is you can call this whatever you want. I'm going to call it Angular Workshop Demo. And you just do HTTPS Angular-workshop.-demo. And you can leave this signing algorithm as the default and then hit create. So what this does is it's going to bring you to this quick start, and you can actually click on Node.js, and we're going to need some of this configuration. We're going to need this audience, and we're going to need this issuer. So if we go back to our instructions, we're going to use those in our .m file. So I'm going to go ahead and copy the audience. And remember, at the beginning, we copied over our n file. And so we're going to just paste the audience in here. We actually don't need the quotes there. That was just because I had the string. And then we're also going to need this issuer URL, which is down here in the node quick start. So we'll copy that, drop that into the issuer. Now, for this workshop, I've already specified the port that we're running the server on and the location of the client, because I didn't want to take the time to have you have to set those up. But you can also change these in your configuration. So since we've changed this, we need to restart our server. It should do it automatically, but just in case, since we're pulling in new environment configuration, we can just restart it ourselves. And first thing we want to do is just call our public endpoint. To do that, we need to add a couple more things to our config here. So we're going to go back over to our auth config, and we need that same audience in our JSON. This time we actually do need the quotes around it. So I'm going to go back and copy the audience again and paste that here. So what this is doing is this is sort of establishing a connection between the front end and the back end. What happens is Auth0 uses this information to create the correct token, because the token is only going to allow access to this protected API. So that way, when the API gets the token, it's going to say, it's going to verify it. It's going to say, oh, it looks like I'm receiving a request from this client ID, and it's meant for this audience, and that's my audience. And so it's okay to send this protected data.
Sam, can you quickly show how in what part of manage you actually set the audience? You create the API?
Yes.
The API section on the dashboard.
Oh, on the dashboard, yeah.
Alex is asking that.
Yeah, so when this is the part of the API that is actually going to connect to Auth0 and create, like, deal with the tokens and everything. As you can see in the configuration for this JWT library, we're passing in the audience and we're passing in the issuer there. And so this little function here is gonna create that, gonna go get that token based on the configuration, if that makes sense. Okay, so now we've got this configuration. We also need to add that to our environment file. So we're going to pull that in. I'm going to go over to our environment. We're going to need the audience, and then we're also going to need the API URL. I already included that just so we didn't have to configure it during the workshop, but this is just the API URL, the port that it's running on. So we're going to pull that in. We're going to add our audience to our auth domain here. And then we're going to create another object just called dev for our dev environment with our API URL. And now we can just refer to our API URL in our environment. Okay, so let's go ahead and call our public endpoint. To do that, we're going to go over to our external API page. So if I just pull this up under pages, external API, let's open this component. And we need to do a couple of things here. We need to bring in our HTTP client. So I'll do private HTTP of the type HTTP client, and that should automatically import from Angular. And we are going to, let's see, we'll also need our environment. So I'm going to do import environment as env from // a bunch of dots, three dots / environments / environment. That'll pull in our environment file. And now we can make just a little call, a little function that'll call our public endpoint. So we're going to do, let's just make a function called call API. This is just going to be a void. It's not going to return anything per se, not for us at least. We'll do this.http.get. And we're going to do a little string interpolation here. We'll say env.dev.api URL. And then we need the path to that function, which is /API /messages /public message. And I can subscribe to that. That's going to be an observable. So I'll do that subscribe. What we're going to get back is going to be an object with a string in it. So let's go ahead and just create a little type for that, just to make TypeScript happy. So just above our component, we can just create a little type, just a little message interface called message. And that's just going to have a property called message, which is going to be a string. So we can go down to result, give it a type of message. And we're just going to set this dot message equal to message, or result dot message, I mean. Okay, so we're calling our public message endpoint and subscribing, and then we're setting a property called message equal to the message. And then we can just open up our HTML. We've already got it set up to display the message over here. So all we need to do is add our click handler to this button. So I'm just going to add a click handler, and it's just going to be our call API method. And if I didn't already say this, this is in step 7 of configuring the API and calling the public endpoint. If I go back over here, so if I try to click on external API, then I get sent over to authorize. You might have to reauthorize because we've added in, we've changed things a little bit. We've added in the audience. So our token is going to actually be different than it was before. So I'm going to click yes. And then I'm going to click get public message. And you can see that we get that result. So this public message, this actually doesn't have anything to do with Auth0. This is just like if we were using a regular API, we would just be able to call this endpoint. But our protected endpoint does require our token. If I go back over to the server, if I open up the server, and I can show you that, see how in this endpoint, the protected endpoint, we have this check JWT. This is what's called a middleware for Express, where it's actually going to check to see if we have that token. That's what all this configuration is. But our public endpoint didn't have that. So what we're going to do is we're going to attach our token to our outgoing request. And that way, the server can actually pull that token off of the request headers and then check to see that it's there. So there's just a couple things we need to do to make this happen. We need to import an HTTP interceptor. In Angular, an HTTP interceptor lets you intercept a request and then do something to it and then send it along the way. It's kind of like middleware, but for the client. So in our app module, we need to import a couple of things. We need to go and import under, in our HTTP import, we need to import HTTP interceptors. And then in our Auth0 import, we need to import Auth HTTP interceptor. So next, to actually use our interceptor in our application, we need to create a new array for our ng model that you might have seen before called providers. So providers is an array. It lets us tell Angular other services and providers to use. So we're going to create a new object. It's going to have a key called provide, and this is going to be for HTTP interceptors. We're also going to give it, we're going to say use class and tell it to use the auth HTTP interceptor. And then lastly, we're going to set this multi-property to true. And if anybody wants to remind me of what the multi-property does, feel free. I always forget. And then now we just need to configure the Auth0 HTTP interceptor. So in our configuration object, there's actually a property called HTTP interceptor that takes its own options object. So this is pretty cool. We can actually give it an allowed list of URLs that we want it to work with. So that way, we're not adding the token to every single outgoing request. We're just giving it a list of URLs that we want it to work with. So what we can do is we can use our environment, so env.dev.api URL, and match it with /API/messages/protected message. So now we're telling Auth0 to only add the token when it matches this URL. And so if I go back and let's look at the network tab here. And if I click get public message, you can see that there's no token added here. I can even refresh the page, and just so you know that it's actually there, You could see there's no bearer, there's no authorization, nothing like that. So now let's actually call the protected endpoint and see what happens. So we can go back to our external API component. We can actually just duplicate this and call secure API. And let's just change this URL to protected message. And then we can go back to our component and let's just add a click event, but change the method to call secure API. And we're in, this is step 8 that has this last bit of code in it. So now, moment of truth, if I call get protected message, you can see that we get the message back. And why is that? Well, if we click on the request here and scroll down, you can see that we have this authorization, and this is actually attaching our token. We can actually copy this whole thing if we want. Go over to jwt.io and just paste it in here, and it actually shows us the payload. So we can see my issuer that we used before. You can see the audience that we had, and a few other things. This subclaim, this is basically like a user ID. So we're actually seeing the payload here. And so that's how we're able to actually get a successful request here and response. So now we have both the public and the protected API. And that's pretty much it. We've gone way over, but luckily we have a recording, so you can watch it at your leisure. I think that's pretty much it. Did we have, it looks like we don't have any other questions. Do we have any other questions? Let's see. Where are we at?
I think we're all good. We did get a question about the recording. Yes, it will be recorded.
Yes. And you are welcome, Fia Yega. Cool. Well, thank you so much for attending. And if you fill out that feedback form, we'll really appreciate it. And yeah, I think that's it. Brooke, do you have any other parting words or?
Only just to invite you to attend any of our other webinars. And then we also have a handful of free workshops. So they'll be more like 2-3 hours long, and that'll be November 16th. So lots of more free learning opportunities. And then of course you're invited to come to Enterprise NG on November 19th and 20th. Sam will actually be one of our speakers there. So definitely go to ng-conf.org and check out the tickets there. But yeah, I mean, those free ones are always fun and exciting. So check out everything on our website. But otherwise, thank you to all 3 of you. That was really, really excellent and great learning. So thank you. And then, yeah, I will make sure that this video gets edited and put out as soon as we can. So just be patient with us while we get the editing process taken care of. But it shouldn't be more than, I would say no more than 2 weeks, but probably a lot less than that. So look for it then.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. And hopefully we can do it again soon.
Awesome. Bye, everybody.
All right, see you guys.
Bye.